Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 3, Confronting Gender and Racial Pay Gap in the UK, Addressing Misinformation with Facts and Respect. DEI is a dreadful idea. First of all, women tend to prefer to work in areas such as social care, part-time healthcare, teaching, and other similar jobs that fit around their own child-rearing responsibilities. That is a tiny segment of the comments that this individual shared under our podcast. I'm going to read for you the comment that this individual shared, but I'm just going to let you also know that we are not going to approve the comment on our platform because we want to create a platform where we can have a proper conversation. So if you're going to be swearing and insulting people, and if you're going to be making misogynistic, sexist comments, then we're not going to include. But there's some parts of what this individual said that allows and opens up for conversation. This is why I'm going to read it so that we can have a bit more of a context as to why we're having this conversation today. Welcome to the Active Learning Podcast. My name is Viana Maya. This is a podcast where we dive deep into the social justice issue that shape our world. We are armed with data, empathy, and a drive for change. I am your host today, and I'm so excited to have this conversation because this is what I do. It's having these conversations, addressing these issues can be heated at times, it can be uncomfortable at times, and sometimes, especially when some of the attack is a personal attack to me, it's hurtful. I'll tell you the process I go through. I see it, I read the first line, I deny that somebody would have actually take the time to put these comments, put these words out there for people to see. I walk away from it, and then I read it as best as I can. I learn to glide over anything that is a bit more personal, but try to get the context. I try to step into the person's shoes to understand a little bit more as to why they felt the need to write something that they wrote, and then to look in between the lines of the insults to see if there's anything we can actually have a conversation on. There have been few in the past that I have just blocked and deleted. So that's another way that you can deal with comments or trolls online. Individuals like this won't always say, we used to say that they wouldn't say this to your face. However, last month we had the riots in the UK where there were people out and about on social media saying things that some people thought were things of the past, things that we thought we had left behind in the 80s in the riots in the UK, in London, Brixton, Liverpool and places like that. We thought that they were left behind. These riots, people who think like that or say these things are few and far in between. There's not a lot of them, etc. But what we saw at the end of July and the beginning of August this year was very much the language that's been bubbling and building up, especially with our own government. The last 14 years, we've had a government that's been governing us and also creating and allowing that division to be fed and fueled. And then we have social media, spaces where it's not regulated when it comes to the language, the racism, the discrimination, the violence, either spoken or shown in videos. And you have people who are hate sells. Hate is a £1 billion industry. People are actually making money out of creating social media or YouTube channels where all they're doing is creating division and spewing hatred online. So that then leads to people like this individual who felt very comfortable to write 2 lengthy comments, which I'm going to read. So grab yourself a cup of tea, your favorite comforting position, wherever you are, sit down, join me and listen, and then let's have a conversation of how do we then burst through the myths that will come out of this. Here we go. Comment number 1.
DEI is a dreadful idea. The way to succeed in any aspect of life is simple. You need to put in the work.
Disclaimer, there's lots of spelling errors, grammar, and capitalization of things, so I might miss some words.
You need to put in the work. I am a white 68-year-old male. I went to a number of awful, underfunded state schools during the course of my education. I lived in a public housing estate. My dad worked at a car plant. My mum worked part-time in a local store. We had no books in our house, not because we couldn't afford them, but because both my parents figured that because they had no opportunity to improve themselves when they grew up, they figured that a low-paid menial job would also be my destination. Don't get me wrong. Although both my parents worked long hours, they really loved me. It's just that they had really low expectation for me. When I left school, I got a job working as a trainee mechanic at a local auto store. Whilst I mostly enjoyed the work, I felt there was more in life than just working from paycheck to paycheck and coming home each day covered in grease. One day, I saw in the local paper that there were evening classes in graphic design at my local college. Graphic design was something I'd always been really interested in, so I enrolled. Long story short, after many years of working my way up the ladder, open bracket, which wasn't helped by the fact I had a working class accent and wasn't ashamed of letting it be known to anyone who asked that both my parents came from a blue collar background. I slowly worked my way up, being a creative director of a fairly large advertising agency. No one helped me to get any of this. I rose up the rank through hard work. When I was finally in a position to hire young creatives, I judged them on just two things: the quality of the portfolio and the keenness to join the agency. I never judged them on the colour of the skin, their religious belief, whether they had a poor or rich background. When I listened to the
Now we come with the swear words.
When I listen to the crap you were talking about, things like disadvantaged black women and other minority groups, it makes my blood boil. If you are disadvantaged, it's because you can't be bothered to get off your lazy butt and do something to improve your life. Stop whinging about how your life is so bad because everyone is against you.
Now we're getting into capital letters.
We all make choices from the day you're born to the day we die. If you make the wrong/bad choice, or worse still, never bother to try to influence your life for the better in any way, then you only have yourself to blame. This unpalatable truth appeals to everyone, be they black, brown, white, sky blue, pink with orange and purple stripes. My advice to you, get over yourself. Stop making excuses for other people's lack of success through their own laziness and get yourself a proper job.
End of comment 1. Comment 2.
And another thing. Can you explain to me exactly how young people from minority groups are being discriminated against any more than I was when I left school 50-odd years ago with just 3 qualifications, a GCS in woodwork, a GCSE in metalwork, and an O-level in art, and still managed to make something of my life with no help from anyone. No help from anyone. Now, let's talk about the gender pay gap. Again, most of what you say is either very misleading or just plain wrong. The most obvious reason that women earn less than their male counterpart is due to the number of reasons that you, for some reason, saw fit not to mention. First of all, women tend to prefer to work in areas such as social care, part-time healthcare, teaching, and other similar jobs that fit around their own child-rearing responsibilities. Most of these occupations have shorter hours, therefore appear to have a lower annual rate of pay. However, that's due to the number of hours worked, so when viewed in terms of the overall yearly pay, it gives the impression that women are paid less than men. Not true! If it were true and women were actually paid less than the male counterpart for doing the same job for the same number of hours each year, then surely employers would hire just women. That way, they could significantly reduce their wage bill, which would improve the bottom line/happy shareholders, correct? There are so many other half-truths and inaccuracies in your video, I could spend a long time pointing them all out, but I can't be bothered. I suggest that if you're going to produce another factual video in the future, it might be a good idea to do some proper research and get some actual fact-check statistics, rather than just taking quick dives into the echo chambers of your choice that support your inaccurate conclusions. Right, that's my lot. I'll leave you now.
Well, thank you so much for that comment, because it is going to help us with having this conversation. So you can see why we decided to read the comments for you to get the context, and the reason we didn't put it, because a lot of it was just, some of it was really good to have the conversation, because in all honesty, some of what this individual pointed out in terms of gender pay, people not working hard enough, people being lazy, etc., these are myths and assumptions that people do have. And some of these people are the decision makers that need to allow things to shift. Some of these people, the employees in your organization that are there to help to make things happen and move. And they have these assumptions where the reason minoritized individuals are not getting into work is because they're lazy. They have these assumptions, especially from an individual of a working class background. If you think about what's been happening with the riots, for example, are being blamed on the disenfranchised working class, not on the upper middle class elite, the politicians, the celebrities, the billionaires with the platforms who are fueling this conversation and division. It's blamed on the people who are also being impacted by the lack of action and good quality policies and implementation, for example, of good housing, access to employment, healthcare, etc. There's so much that's broken in our society, but it's all been blamed into different groups. Okay. So what this individual shared here allowed us then to go and do some research that everybody could do. The reason our last two podcasts and any podcast coming up is like we're going to mix up with having podcasts that have research and having podcasts that is conversational, that we're talking about the lived and living experience of individuals, because that is my job. My job as a DEI, anti-racism and people development, cultural transformation, all my different hats that I wear, it's about painting a picture that people can see of the reality. The numbers are there. You can find the research if you really wanted. So, for example, in 2016, TUC, the Trade Union Congress, released a report called Black Qualified and Underemployed. Now, if you go into the Black Qualified and Underemployed, and this is, mind you, this is 2016, you will find that this research was conducted by the Joseph Rowntree, that an ethnicity and poverty showed that Black and ethnic minorities employees tend to have slightly higher educational qualification than the white counterparts. However, that doesn't always translate to employment. Now, in 2022, we also conducted our own research called Untapped Talent, the Hidden Opportunity in Scotland, because we were providing employability support to ethnic minority individuals in Scotland. We realized that we didn't have the data to really understand, the people that were coming to us, the lived experience that they were sharing, their qualification, etc., wasn't matching the reality in which the data was presenting. Now, our research showed the same thing. Black and minority ethnic individuals are overqualified in Scotland, but the qualification doesn't always translate to quality pay or the quality roles. Now, this is not for everyone's experience. This is some of the people who just happen to not maybe be lucky enough to have found that opportunity, that employer that sees them for the value they have. Now, as I said, you can Google this if you want specific statistics in relation to what the gentleman said about, are young minoritized individuals more disadvantaged than he was in 50 odd years ago. Then the answer is yes. I Googled Black graduate 2024 unemployment, and my Google statistics shows here male and ethnic minority graduates feel held back in a job. But this is HR Review. If you look at the Voice Online, you can see the article states Black men who have recently graduated are over 3 times more likely to be jobless after university in comparison to the white male counterparts. And this goes into details of the different programs created to get them into work and opportunity. But you're more likely to find now that individuals are looking to start their own business, because when you can't get that employment, you start your own work. This is something that I did for myself. When I was struggling to get back into work, I decided that I'll go back to university. And when I leave university, I was either going to leave with a job or a business. And at the time, I left with both and then went on to transition to having my own business. Right? So looking at your own experience from 50 years ago, you can then see that if you're looking at the socio-economic background, there's so many people, young people, who have been let down, who are not having access to opportunities. The opportunities in terms of getting into work, the criteria and the asks are a bit harder to attain than maybe it would have been in the past. Now employers will be asking for 2 to 3 years for a job that would be entry level, for example. So there's so many different hurdles and layers that is completely different to what it would have been like 50 years ago. Comparing things to the past, but not seeing the barriers of the present and the future, doesn't help the individuals experiencing these challenges. This is what we're going to do in this podcast today. We're going to cut through the myths. We're going to explore the facts. We're going to discuss action that we can take to push for a fairer, more equitable future. And if you are ready for that meaningful conversation to progress, then we welcome your comments, we welcome your suggestions, but keep it respectful. Keep it engaging, share your own facts and statistics with us as well, because I am not claiming to have all of the answers. I will bring you the best that I can, but I also welcome in learning something new. The key areas we're going to look at is the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, and then the rest will flow into it. So let's start with acknowledging that as an individual who has experienced the lack of opportunity from your background and risen up the ranks and to be in, creative director of a largest industry, that is brilliant. But it's unfair to say that you did all of that without backing and support. Somebody would have promoted you. So somebody would have seen you for you and what you bring to the table. And you then did the same for the individuals that you were hiring. The reality is not everybody out there that works and sees people the way that you did, the way that somebody else saw you. Similar to me, when I look at my own background and how I've progressed because somebody has seen my potential. For example, in order to build this business, I had a mentor who saw my potential, encouraged me to write the proposal. I wasn't going to continue to do employability if I was going to made to fit into the same box. But my mentor and coach encouraged me to write that proposal, wrote the proposal. Somebody else saw the proposal and saw the potential in it and decided they could fund what I did. When I went to university, in order for me to start my business, I joined a business hub. Yes, you as an individual will have to put in the work. However, people still need to open doors for you. Opportunities still need to be fairly accessed and given in a way that you can step on that opportunity ladder and grow and progress. I've gone on to win awards. I've gone on to support thousands of people, hundreds of organizations. But the reality is I am still having to face hurdles, systemic barriers, and different things as I get closer to that glass ceiling in terms of where my ambition wants to go. There are systemic barriers that I still have to jump over. And at the same time, I really believe that it's important to share so that we can start to unbolt these barrier hurdles and dismantle them completely so that those coming behind us can have a clearer path. And you know what that clearer path is going to do? It's going to allow for real innovation to happen. It's going to allow for our economy to grow. It's going to allow for people to start to live in that unity that they deserve. It's going to allow for us to remove those barriers that we have. In the UK especially, I still struggle with the class system, but we know we have the class system. So that socio-economic movement, it's really something that we don't always talk about, but we know that it's there. It's almost like it's become accepted that we have the class divide and some people will have and some people won't have, right? So when we start to dismantle these systemic barriers, we start to dismantle this perception, this thinking, we start to challenge people who uphold the status quo and have the power to shift, then we can actually start to create that equitable society for all. But we can't talk about all at once. So in my podcast, I choose to talk about gender equity, racial equity, because those are the things that are closest to me, to the people that come to me for support and services. But that doesn't mean I'm going to deny the challenge that a working class individual will have, a person with a disability will have, that intersectionality of people's identity across through the lines, through the spectrum, through the the diversity, the characteristic, the makeup of individuals. So I'm not going to deny people's experience simply because some of us are doing well and then the assumption is the rest of us are not putting in the work. No, it's because they're still encountering barriers and they might not even have the knowledge or the support system to jump over them. So the way that I see systemic barriers that some of us have overcome is either we've had a little trampoline in front of that barrier, which is made up of quality people and opportunity. We've jumped on that and jumped over it. But it doesn't make sense then if we all keep doing the same barrier Olympics, just keep jumping over them, but not putting in the work to remove them. So let's put in the work to remove them. And in order for us to put in the work to remove them, let's burst through some of the myths. So we're going to start with the gender pay. And I'm going to use the example that the commentator gave of where women are choosing to work, which particularly is the health and social care sector. So according to the ONS report, women in the UK earns 8.3% less than men, and that's including all women in full-time position, but this gap widens in specific fields. So for example, in the NHS, where women make up 77% of the workforce, male doctors still earn 17% more than their female counterparts in similar roles. This is data that you can go and dive in. So for example, white women faced a 7.9% pay gap compared to white male, but the disparity is even more pronounced for women of color. So Black, African, Caribbean women earn up to 20% less than their white counterparts for similar roles. And this is according to the TUC 2022 report. Now, if we really dive into it, we've also got another statistics that you can use. But if you really then dive into it, so if we look at women of color, including Asian, Black, and other ethnic minority, experience a double pay gap, one that reflects both the gender and the ethnicity disparity. So when we're talking about disadvantaged women, as that individual said, is that for Black, Asian, minority ethnic women, they face the gender and ethnicity pay gap disparity at the same time. So Black and ethnic minority women on average earn 10% less per year compared to white men in similar role. This is the Fawcett Society 2020 report. And if you look deeper into the statistics, so we're going down the ladder now because, we've seen the 8.3% at the beginning. That was for all women. But when we start to break down the data even more, and we look at the statistics for Pakistani and Bangladeshi women, you will see that 76% are concentrated in low-paid work, compared to 58% of white women. These are not isolated issues. These are systemic issues that persist across sectors and industry. It's always important for any organization when we start to report the gender pay gap, report it by breaking it down and making sure that we don't just clobber like we do with the terminology BAME and BME. Whenever data was reported, especially the data that's reported either the negative or positive, it was all clumped together and we never did break down the data. But when you break down the data, you see there's a group of people within that banner who are always left behind. So in this case, Pakistani and Bangladeshi women are always at the bottom when it comes to the pay disparity. So then when you come to thinking about, okay, what do we need to do? When we're thinking about solutions, we need to think from the bottom and work our way up. What do we need to do to ensure that we're getting more Pakistani and Bangladeshi women into those sustainable high paid roles? How are we working with the community to understand what they need? Rather than doing at people, we need to do more of working with the community, with the group of women, to ask what do we need and how do we then create the system of change. So the change is going to be different. So of course, for example, for white women, the change will be faster as we start to progress and implement. White women are going to get to where they need to get to faster than everybody else. So what we do then is throw back the ladder, dismantle the challenge that you were overcoming, to then make it better for other people, and then work with the other groups to ensure that you're also supporting. So this is a way of us trying to not just do the quick fix. I remember being in a meeting with an organization and we were talking about why people tend to focus more on gender than everything else. And what some of the individuals were saying, the leaders were saying, is like, we've been studying gender for quite some time, so we have the data and we are more aware of the issues, so we know where and what we need to do. Also, because of the time deadline, it means we have something like gender where we can get positive results quicker than everything else because we haven't always had the data for it. So that's a quick summary of the gender pay gap. But the gender pay gap is so broad and is complex that it requires you to take that time out and do some research. We're going to put some links to organizations you can follow. On our website, we're going to create a resource space where you can access some of these links, or you can also join our Unity Network membership where we can provide more of these resources. So the next part that we're going to tackle is the racial pay gap and the employment disparity. So again, the individuals was asking, why is it our minoritized youth more disadvantaged than he was 50 years ago? So shifting our focus here to the racial pay gap, we can see similarly alarming disparity. So Black workers in the UK earn between 7 to 13% less than white counterparts. Again, this is in the ONS report. This is the 2022. Asian employees fare slightly better, but still face significant inequities, earning up to 10% less than white employees in similar roles. And the racial pay gap isn't just about the pay. It extends to the employment opportunities as well. According to a report by Resolution Foundation in 2021, Black graduates twice as likely to be unemployed compared to white graduates, despite having similar qualification. The challenge doesn't end there. We're now also going to then dive into the recruitment discrimination, which is another major hurdle. So ethnic minority candidates must submit 60% more application than white candidates to receive the same number of callback. This is just to receive the potential for an interview, even when the qualifications are identical. So you probably would have heard stories of individuals who have changed their ethnic sounding or African sounding or Asian sounding name off of their CV and put in their English or Western name on the CV and have received a callback, have even received an offer. So I'm going to share those in our link as well. For some groups, it's even worse. So people with Middle Eastern or North African backgrounds need to send 90% more job application than the white Britons. And this is an article that you can find. This was an article that was written 5 years ago in The Guardian, titled Minority Ethnic Britons Facing Shocking Job Discrimination. This article was extraordinary because it compared its research from one that was conducted similarly in the 1960s. And what this research showed was that the discrimination that minority ethnic Britons experienced in the 1960s is still exactly the same as they do now. So to answer the question of our commentator is that yes, Black and Asian youth are still experiencing similar barriers that you would have faced 50 years ago, and it hasn't improved. And the fact that people of North African and Middle Eastern background have to submit 90% more application, that is shocking. The researchers in the article talk about the different radical ways in which they were able to find out the discrimination. So for example, sending the same identical CVs, but changing the names and details in it for it to look more Western, and seeing that result. It has statistics in it as well that you can look at, either the overqualification. So it doesn't matter if an individual has more qualification, they're still being discriminated against based on their ethnicity and their backgrounds. And what I love about this data, it breaks it down into details. For example, for those of you that are saying, you're saying Middle Eastern, etc. So in the data, it shows here, so people of Pakistani origin had to make 70% more application. The figure was higher for Nigerian, Middle East. A quote from one of the researchers was, the persistent gap in callback found for more visible and culturally distinct minorities, regardless of the occupation considered or the information included in the application, suggests that employers may simply read no further as soon as they see a Middle Eastern sounding or African sounding name. The information, the statistics, the data is there. And if we're not talking about it, if we're not challenging it and calling it, this is one of the reasons I struggled with employability, providing people just employability. We weren't always addressing these in your face discrimination and racism that people experience. We can get a person's CV up to scratch, but if there is discrimination and racism in the workplace, there is a perception in relation to people with North African names or Middle Eastern names or Nigerian names, then all the work we do around employability won't make sense in terms of us actually supporting that system change. Another article that we are also going to include is the accent barrier, for example. Accent is another bias that we don't always talk about when it comes to opportunity in the workplace. So how a person can progress in the workplace and the assumption that they won't be able to communicate, they won't be understood, etc. This is something that is still happening in some places of work, and this is things that we need to address. We are going to become a bit more global. We now have softwares that allows us to be able to communicate clearly. So to reduce a person's progression simply because of an assumption that it might not be understood, rather than seeing that it is a bonus to have people of different accent and background and culture background in your organization, that's where we have a problem. Now, we could go on when it comes to the various ways that people are discriminated against. We can see that this is a persistent pattern that has been going on for decades. When we look at the employment rate overall, the disparity continues. So, for example, 77.5% of white people in the UK are employed, compared to 67.4% of ethnic minorities individuals. Now, this is a report that was in 2022. So yearly, do your search and see what's happening. The Fawcett Society also provided another more stark statistics. If current trend of discrimination, of lack of ambition in terms of how we're going to break these systemic barriers, it will take 320 years for Black and ethnic minority groups to achieve racial pay parity in the UK. 320 years. Now, this is a reminder that we have to keep doing the work, that we have to keep talking about the challenges, that we have to keep presenting the stark realities in order for us to implement real change. So, of course, it brings us to answer the question, or to even answer the statement at the beginning that a commentator made, was that DEI is dreadful. Well, DEI is only dreadful if it's done in a way that it is not building that society for all of us to be included. Right? So DEI's initiatives are important, but we need to be able to move from having a conversation about it, from the awareness work, to actually implementing. Now, for us to start to implement a tangible change, we have to also face some uncomfortable truths and reality. It's up to you, the organization, to be clear on what it is that you need to do. We know these statistics already, but for the sake of this being a statistic rich, we're going to reinforce some of the statistics that we know that are out there. So McKinsey and Company 2020 report, this is well documented in most organizations' DEI and anti-racism agenda and strategies. But McKinsey and companies say that companies with diverse leadership team are 35% more likely to financially outperform those less diverse counterparts. So DEI is not just about fairness, which is the most important part, but is also about improving your business performance, innovation, and productivity. In the world that we live in right now, where we need to grow, we actually need to start to generate that income to come back in. In order for us to tackle some of the societal issues that we have right now, we need to start looking at ways that we can diversify our organization, bring in those untapped talent that populated in all of these different reports. We have it in our own reports in here. Start to make sure that we're not discriminating against people based on their names, based on their background, based on their university, based on their socioeconomic backgrounds, etc. So DEI is good, it's important, it's useful, But as we said in the last podcast, DEI, it needs a reform and it needs to be reclaimed in its fullest term: diversity, equity, and inclusion. But most importantly, DEI initiative aims to correct historical injustice and provide equitable access to opportunity for people from marginalized background. For example, DEI works towards eliminating recruitment discrimination, ensuring diversity in leadership, and it helps us to nurture an environment where everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed. For us to get to the space of equality, we need to be providing initiatives led with equity first. For equity to happen, we have to understand that some of us, we face similar challenges, but the hurdles we have to jump are different, and we need to address those in a different kind of way. This isn't about giving anyone an unfair advantage. It's about dismantling systemic barriers that prevent hard work from being equally rewarded. So as we conclude this mammoth podcast full of statistics, it's essential to recognize that the gender and racial pay gap in the UK are not just individual issues. These are systemic problems that require systemic solution, but they're also problems that have an intersectional lens. And for some people, they experience these all at the same time. And sometimes you're having to pick and choose. With millions of success stories available, we cannot negate the deep-seated inequalities affecting millions of people across the UK. And this is why we actively learn and implement as we go. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to the next session, where we're going to continue to dive through statistics and data, but we're going to continue to mix it up with conversation. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about DEI? What data do you have available in your organization? What do you think about the data that we presented today, that we discussed today? How does that impact you? How does that impact your organization and what you do? And share any links and resources that you may have. We want to make sure that this is an experience that we are all sharing and learning together. And in the meantime, let's continue to have respectful conversation, inclusive conversations that allows us to shift forward. Thank you and see you soon. Bye.